So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Georgette and I'll be moderating today's event, and I, along with all of today's speakers, work at the Stockholm International Water Institute. And this is the second in a three-part webinar series that we are holding in the run-up to Stockholm Plus 50. Stockholm Plus 50 marks 50 years since the first ever environmental meeting and the founding of the United Nations Environmental Programme, and that meeting took place here in Stockholm. And this is going to provide us an opportunity for decision makers from around the world to unite in protecting people and planet. And water has a key role to play, as it is fundamental to achieving each and every one of the Sustainable Development Goals. Water encompasses social, cultural and political values. And Stockholm Plus 50 is a pivotal stepping stone ahead of the landmark UN 2023 Water Conference, which will highlight water's role in the sustainability agenda. Earlier this year, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, reminded us that humanity depends on the essential products and services that nature provides, from food and fresh water to pollution control and carbon storage. And by damaging the natural world, we're threatening our own well-being. Today's webinar will focus on water's role in ensuring healthy, sustainable landscapes that benefit both people and the planet. We have three speakers who will present their perspective for around 10 minutes, and there'll be some time at the end to answer some questions. So if you do have any questions for the speakers, I encourage you to write them in the chat function, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the presentations. Today's first speaker, Dr. Anna Temberg's work focuses on water for resilient landscapes and landscape governance. Anna has lived and conducted fieldwork and research in many different parts of the world and published papers on various aspects of natural resources management and assessment. Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much. And could you please show my presentation? Yes, I'm going to give an introduction to the role of water for resilient landscapes. Next, please. And try to explain why landscapes are so crucial for the water cycle. And as you can see in this picture, water transpires from vegetation, lakes and rivers in the landscape and evaporates from water bodies into the atmosphere, where water vapor forms clouds that return water to the Earth's surface in the form of precipitation, including rainfall, that again runs off into rivers and lakes or infiltrates into the soil and groundwater. So landscapes, they regulate the water or hydrological cycle. Next, please. So what do we then mean by landscapes and the landscape approach? There are many different definitions of the landscape approach, including 10 principles adopted by the Convention on Biological Diversity. In short, landscape-wide approaches integrate the development of agriculture, forestry, energy, and water, and provide habitat for biodiversity, of course. And applying the landscape approach is particularly useful when integrated solutions are required to solve complex challenges related to sustainable development and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, landscape approaches can also be mechanisms for dialogue and discussion among multiple stakeholders regarding trade-offs in the landscape between different goals and ecosystem services. Next, please. And there are many water-related ecosystem services that are provided by landscapes, and the drivers of change in landscapes affecting these ecosystem services include changing populations, changes in harvest and resource consumption, including diets, changes in land use and land cover, and climate change. And these drivers impact on the landscape hydrology and the factors I mentioned earlier: rainfall, evapotranspiration, water vapor transport, runoff, infiltration, and the recharge of groundwater, which have a direct impact on the ecosystem services provided by landscapes, such as provision of clean water for agriculture and industry, regulation of water supplies, cultural water services, including for recreation and supporting services. And all these ecosystem services, they contribute to the achievement of the SDGs underpinned by water concerns, and there are a range of them, and I'll come back to that soon. And also to meet the commitments under the multilateral environmental agreements for climate change, biodiversity, and desertification. Next, please. Stakeholder participation is a key principle of the landscape approach, and multi-stakeholder learning dialogues and platforms are often used as tools for the landscape approach. And this can start with raising awareness and identification of actors in a particular landscape or thematic area related to the landscape approach, followed by the building of a coalition for change that explores the system dynamics of the issue or the landscape. And this leads to creation of a shared understanding of the system that can lead to development of joint policy recommendations that in turn can inform collective action at the bottom of this spiral, and implementation of integrated water and landscape management approaches. Next, please. Landscapes can be defined in different ways and also have different system boundaries. And this is a catchment and landscape in the Central Rift Valley in Ethiopia, where the landscape approach contributes to reduction of soil erosion and of sedimentation and siltation into the freshwater lake at the center of this map, Lake Hawassa. And the landscape approach also generates other ecosystem services in the surrounding landscape and catchments related to agricultural productivity, provision of habitat for biodiversity, etc. Next, please. Also at the local level, it's very important with stakeholder participation and dialogue, and to involve both men, women, and youth, and all key groups to identify common priorities and action areas. Next, please. And it's also important to understand stakeholders' power relations. This is from the same area in Ethiopia where we looked at power relations among different stakeholder groups related to power to set objectives, norms, and quality control, power to allocate or denying resources and to defining rules, and also power to structure the participation in decision-making processes where women are often excluded, and also access to knowledge and information. And it's very important to understand these relations before forming a coalition of change or multi-stakeholder platform for the landscape approach. Next, please. And here is a much larger landscape with a different system boundary. It's the Great Green Wall for the Sahara and the Sahel, where there are many commonalities in terms of ecology and socioeconomic conditions across this large landscape. And here, land and water management interventions related to, example, forest management and agroforestry and pasture and crop management have led to a range of benefits for people and the environment related to agricultural production, erosion control, water retention, etc. Next, please. And also this type of large landscapes, they directly impact on the hydrological cycle. So here we can see in the green map, evapotranspiration regulated by vegetation, which in turn can lead to enhanced precipitation, as you can see in the blue map. So it really proves the role of landscapes in the hydrological cycle, even at larger scales. Next, please. Finally, we also have to understand the trade-offs, as I mentioned in the beginning, between food and water security and other ecosystem services. And mosaic landscapes with a well-functioning hydrology can contribute to a range of ecosystem services and to achievement of a range of the SDGs, as you can see at the bottom of this figure. Sustainable agriculture will contribute to SDG 2 on zero hunger, involving women in management and decision making in these landscapes can contribute to the gender SDG 5, and of course to SDG 6 on clean water and sanitation. Also, reforestation can lead to carbon sequestration and contribute to climate action, SDG 13. And these type of landscapes can also support biodiversity and life on land, SDG 15. So this is what we are striving for, mosaic landscapes with a well-functioning hydrology contributing to a range of SDGs. And with that, I thank you for your attention and hand back to our facilitator.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that really interesting kickoff to today's webinar. I think it was really great that you mentioned the water cycle there at the beginning, showing how it is really important to understand how all these things fit together. And then you wrapped it up nicely at the end by showing then the SDG benefits dotted around the landscape. And I thought it was also quite poignant, how much the mosaic landscapes need people. And I think you really lifted that, which was really valuable. Our next speaker, Lotta Samuelsson, coordinates activities related to landscape management and restoration. Lotta has 30 years of experience in natural resource management in the Baltic Sea region, Europe, and the Global South. Lotta, I'll hand over to you to carry on.
Really nice to be here. Thank you, Georgette, and thank you, Anna, for that really nice kind of framing of the session and the landscapes. I will present a case study or a project that we are working with, and I would like to have the first slide, please. This is a project, it's called LoCoFoRest, short for locally controlled forest restoration, and it's a project led by the Swedish Forest Agency with two partners, which is CV for one, and then a foundation called Eco Innovation Foundation. And this project stems exactly from one of those multi-stakeholder dialogues that Anna shared before, when we met, identify a problem, try to find a joint solution, and it actually ended up in this capacity building project, which is SIDA funded. Next, please. I will give you a short background why we do this project, and then about the program idea, a little about the program outline, and then specifically on the change project that we support in this project. So next, please. These two pictures, they show the illustration of why we do. No, that's too fast. Please go back. Thank you. Why do we have a capacity building program directed towards the Global South when it comes to forest landscape restoration? Well, the reason is that we on the globe, on Earth, we have lost so much of our original forest landscape, now forest cover, as you can see to the left. These are pictures from World Resources Institute. And as you can see, at 2015, we had only 15% intact forest left. And as much as almost 30% were deforested. And then we have fragmented and degraded forests in between. And this is, of course, for all the reasons that Anna told you about. This is good. This is no good for either livelihoods, climate, biodiversity, water, or anything. So we need to do something about it. The nice thing is that there are, as World Resources Institute say, there are opportunities everywhere, meaning that there are lots of good opportunities for forest landscape restoration. And when you look at what kind of forest restoration is the most feasible to do, then it is this mosaic type of forest landscape restoration that Anna also told you about, which has got the most kind of opportunities to actually happen. So next, please. Next slide, please. That was too fast again. Please go back to the little tree, because I would just want to share, why do we as a water institute, why do we engage in forest landscape restoration? And the reason for that is that the trees and the forest in the landscape, they are kind of the engine in the water cycle. The trees, they are like a pump. They of course use the water available in the landscape, in the soils, and they pump it up out to the leaves, where the water evaporates and, as Anna also said, falls back as precipitation, either locally, but also actually on the larger scale, also within continents and even between continents, due to well, physical properties that I won't really go into right now. Also, the roots of the trees, they help form little paths in the soil, so that when you get the heavy precipitation, the water can actually percolate down into the soil and feed the vegetation, but also actually recharge groundwater, depending on the circumstances. There are lots of other really interesting physiological interconnections between trees and forests and water, but I won't go into details, just to say the trees and the forests are crucial in the landscape to feed the water cycle. Next, please. There are around the globe many initiatives for forest landscape restoration. As you can see here, there are the Bond Challenge, the Agenda 2030, the UN Climate Summit, something called New York Forest Declaration. So there's lots of restoration initiatives going on. The sad part is that the goals that they set up are hard to reach. It doesn't happen as much as people want to. And some of the projects that are actually implemented are not sustainable. Once the project is over, then we go back to business as usual. So then on the next slide, we started this project, the locally forest restoration initiative, because we asked, how can we scale up restoration of forest landscapes while securing the prosperity of local communities and also maintain and improve ecosystem services? And looking at why are not more restoration initiatives sustainable? Can that be because the objectives that has been defined for them, are they maybe set up by people from the global north and not from the people living in the landscapes? Are they adapted to the needs of rural communities in the landscapes to be restored? Are the programs water smart? Do they consider the hydrological perspectives? And could linking the local communities to national markets and value chains for sustainably produced food and fibers, which is wood, could that improve sustainability and scalability of forest landscape restoration programs? Next, please. Next slide, please. So our idea for this capacity building program, which has got 6 participating countries, is Burkina Faso, it's Ethiopia, it's Nepal, Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos. And in these countries, we invite young professionals from FLR-related governments and civil society, the private sector, and academies. And with them, through different activities that I will share later, we discuss the interlinkages between governance, sustainable markets, and forest ecosystems for sustainable and scalable forest landscape restoration. And together with the participants, we identify markets for products from restored forests, and we support entrepreneurship within the local communities to try to enable a long-term income from these restored forests, which are also, of course, sustainably managed. And our aim is to build institutional understanding of the key aspects for forest landscape restoration, and we also include, of course, the human rights and gender aspects. Next, please. And as Anna said, the mosaic landscape is really important for many of the sustainable development goals. And if we can have a landscape with a mosaic of protected forests, managed forest, agroforestry, agriculture, and human settlements, where all the stakeholders or all the relevant key stakeholders in the area are actually engaged in the forest landscape restoration project or activities or visions or strategies, where you actually approach the different trade-offs for using the natural resources in the landscape, then we believe that the sustainability and the scalability of those restoration initiatives can improve. Next, please. So I would like to share with you a little bit about the program outline with those participants. We have about 25 participants every year, and it's a 5-year project. And we will also actually add on at some stage French-speaking countries, mainly from West Africa. We have a startup workshop. We have a quite dense web course where we discuss all the different pillars of the program, so governance, markets, ecosystem services, gender, and human rights. We have an intensive workshop where we discuss these aspects with our participants. And then they will have 5 or 6 months where they will work on their own change projects, looking at what needs to be changed in their local context to be able to improve the probability for these scalable and sustainable forest landscape projects. Then we have a final workshop, and then we also will create an alumni network to enable the participants to continue networking and support each other. Next, please. I'm running a little bit out of time, so I won't go so much into the change project, but just to say that the change projects that the participants work with is kind of the key of the program. So it's to identify the opportunities with forest landscape restoration and the governance and market system changes needed for it to be sustainable and scalable. And to find, together with stakeholders, coming back to the stakeholder processes that Anna talked about, to find a joint vision and a roadmap for restoration together with these key stakeholders. Next, please. And we have developed a specific change project method, which we encourage our participants to follow. And that includes, of course, basic research on the project area, but it includes the stakeholder dialogues. It includes finding the shared understanding for the restoration opportunities of the problems and of the opportunities and the objectives of this restoration activity. Next, please. So that was short about this project, and you can find more on the website, which is LoCoFoRest.se. But since we are in line, since this webinar is in line with the Stockholm Plus 40 conference, I would just like to share some call for actions from CV related to forest landscape restoration. And that is, please ensure that forest landscape restoration approaches consider the multiple water-related services that forest and trees provide to achieve the SDGs. Sometimes the climate and the biodiversity is so much in focus that water is forgotten. So please don't forget the water. Also, make sure to include the local communities and their needs for sustainable livelihoods and landscape restoration activities and strategies. I don't think you can have sustainable and scalable restoration activities unless you include the local communities. And also, of course, strengthen and develop policies that take into account the forest water nexus and the water-related services that forests and trees provide to humans, especially in the context of climate change. Thank you. Look forward to your questions later on in the seminar.
Thank you very much, Lotta. And we will be sharing a recording of the webinar afterwards. So we can also share the PowerPoints as well, because you went into some good detail there. So I think people would definitely appreciate being able to look at that a little closer. And thank you for raising the importance of considering both people and planet together. And that the importance of, I mean, I think the alumni network, for example, sounds like a very interesting solution to creating these sustainable solutions that sort of have a legacy. And as you said, we can't afford to restore landscapes at the expense of water. So thank you very much for that presentation, Lotta. Our next and final speaker, Janani Beloyi, is based at SUI's Pretoria office, and her primary area of work is to support the implementation of development projects, specifically seeking to make more public and private capital accessible for water-related projects in Africa. Janani is also SUI's gender equality focal point. So I'll hand over to you now, Janani, and let us know if you would prefer to share your own slides or if we should share them for you.
Thank you, Georgette. I think I'm already sharing my screen. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. I'll be sharing on transforming investment in African rain-fed agriculture, in short, which is called TIARA initiative, and particularly focusing on the gender perspectives, and put into context some of the implementation that we have in the Zambezi Basin. So I'll just give an overview of the situation on what inspired the initiative of transforming investments in African rain-fed agriculture. I'll start off by, there's only 5.5% of cultivable land in Africa, which is irrigable, which is a natural phenomenon. I think we are all familiar with that. However, there's 94.5% of cultivable land, which is therefore rain-fed. You'll see on the side, there's an illustration of how much cultivable land and how much is actually rain-fed agriculture on the African continent. And we also have a 65% of the population, which is employed directly or indirectly in agriculture. And yet 80% of all the agricultural activity is smallholder rain-fed farmers, which are usually forgotten, not receiving enough investment. And that is why the TIARA initiative was actually formed, to try and highlight the contribution that is made by smallholder farmers in the food productivity of the African continent, however, not matched by the equal sum amount of investment. And therefore, Africa has the lowest crop yields and agricultural productivity in the world as it is. By 2016, we had about 218 million undernourished population, up by 44 million from 1992. And 60% of the world's unutilized arable land is actually in Africa. And I just have this write-up from the Basic Food Imports that Africa remains a net importer of food, although it has 60% of the world's uncultivable arable land, and is actually importing food at $35 billion per year, which is quite unsustainable. And at the center of all of this that I've just mentioned is the smallholder farmer, typically involved in subsistence rain-fed farming. And these are usually characterized by women who have also insecure land rights and the threat to progress on gender equality and sustainable development. And moreover, despite the fact that Africa's economy relies heavily on agriculture, the vast majority of its food production entirely depended on rainfall, which is becoming more and more erratic because of climate change. So the global climate crisis actually not only threatens the life and livelihoods of over 100 million in extreme poverty in Africa, but also the many women-led or households that are led by women on the African continent. And at the end of this, what we deal with is destabilized local markets, increased food insecurity, and limiting economic growth and the likes. I will speak of this illustration that we have in the TIARA initiative, which is actually the multiple benefits of green water management. So the green water management is actually the starting point of the TIARA initiative. If you look at the bottom, if you look at the approaches that we've listed that actually contribute to the green water management, these are conservation agriculture, climate smart regenerative, rainwater harvesting, and all these things that we include. So what happens on the farmer level is a direct impact, has a direct impact on the catchment. So if you look at the farmer, if she chooses to adopt farming methods that leads to more soil erosion, then there's gonna be an impact on the rest of the catchment. But likewise, if she applies some of the approaches that reduce soil erosion and create percolation of water, she's actually contributing to catchment management. But then, and she's actually doing all this work for free. She's not being incentivized by the government or anything. And when we look at the second level, that's where we call on the government to support through investments in rain-fed agriculture. So you will need also the private sector to come on board and say, well, there's business opportunities and we can be selling new varieties of fertilizer or various other agricultural inputs. And we'll also call on development partners, the financial partners, who need to view rain-fed agriculture sector as being a sector that can put money into developing the capacity. And then on the outer rim, which is the off-farm or the economy level, once you've got the governance level support right, you see this economic chain where there's an outer rim where you are getting onto the farm level to improve resilience, great agricultural outputs, efficiency gains, and manufacturers. And at the end of the day, you start seeing the improved livelihoods of people, improved health outcomes, education outcomes, children going to school more frequently, and better nutrition. This is what the Tiara initiative is actually advocating for. And then now I'm going to turn to a pilot project which we are implementing in the Zambezi Basin. So the Zambezi Basin is Africa's fourth largest river, and then it has about 8 riparian states, and there's a population of over 40 million people. SIWI is supporting the ZAMCOM, which is the Zambezi Basin River Commission, through the implementation of their strategic plan. And we focus particularly on the livelihoods, where we are focusing on supporting the smallholder farmers in rain-fed agriculture as the basis of rural economy. And we support them through improving soil moisture capture and retention. And some of the projects that are included are the small-scale water storage, rainwater harvesting, and climate-smart agriculture. So what SIWI is currently doing is contributing to the investment plan of the Commission to make sure that the investments that we're calling on in livelihood support, there's actually a component of it that will go to rain-fed agriculture, and in the end, women who are engaged in most of agriculture on the African continent. Some of the key issues that we're experiencing in the Zambezi Basin and also listed in the strategic plan is persistent poverty. There's about 64.8 subsistent rain-dependent farmers, and 44% of them are below the poverty line. There's also great environmental degradation. About 51% of the basin is moderately degraded, while 14% is highly degraded. And you may ask, what actually are the activities that SIWI is supporting the member states of the Zambezi Basin, River Basin Commission, and also the women that are engaged in enhanced rain-fed agriculture. We have commissioned a land and water resources assessment and management for sustainable rain-fed system in the selected hotspots in the Zambezi Basin. Our first task was to characterize the biophysical and socio-economic factors. And herein, that's where lies the numbers of women that are engaged in enhanced rain-fed agriculture. And then we're also applying the watershed management protocol application. And then our other task is to do a land degradation assessment and restoration. And then our fourth task is the capacity building. So in the capacity building, where we will actually identify the hotspots of rain-fed agriculture in the basin and be able to link them with various training opportunities and access to the markets. And then, gender equality and mainstreaming approaches that we are currently looking at in the Zambezi Basin. And just to recap, I did mention that there's about between 50 to 80% of women that are engaged in agricultural labor force in Africa. And what we experience actually at the river basin level is that yet the decision maker for the water supply and water resources are men. So, and also in addition, women stand out as pillars of economic growth in agriculture. And you'll also note that Africa has the youngest population of young people, and also with high unemployment rates for youth. And we also consider that agriculture plays the dominant role in influencing the size and structure of rural employment. And when we are engaging with the river basin organizations like ZAMCOM and the neighboring one like OCACOM for the Okavango and the Orange Senku River Basin, we note a very low number of women who are actually engaged in the river basin organizations as employees. And that translates into less of them actually contributing to the decision-making about the water resources and management of it. As I noted, there's about 10% of employees actually working in the river basin organizations. So there's various underserved and vulnerable sections of the population, which we encourage the member countries of the Zambezi Basin organizations to actually have them represented in water sector policies. And how are we doing this? We advocate for gender transformative investments. So we are currently supporting ZAMCOM through the investment plan that I've mentioned. And now the 8 member countries are actually negotiating a grant from GCF and the AFDB, and where we are advocating that in that grant, there's an explicit component of enhanced rainfed agriculture that would stand to benefit from the investments. And then we are also supporting them to integrate gender equality and social inclusion into the water programs. For example, the SADC, river basin organizations and shared water course institutions and member states. We actually participated in the 9th one, which was hosted last year, where there was an opportunity for all the member states of the commission to share how they will actually mainstream gender and gender equality into their water sector plans. In addition, we also integrate the gender transformative approach in the development and implementation of climate resilient water investments in Tiara. And then we're also contributing by doing a capacity needs assessment for women in the basin to benefit from gender equality and social inclusion, or in short, the JC River Basin Organization training material content, which is we're currently contributing to. And then also on the other work that we're doing at SIWI in alignment with the United Nations Security Resolution on Women, Peace and Security and Youth Peace and Security, we are drawing inspiration from the Women in Water Diplomacy Network in the Nile, which is an engagement of SIWI's Shared Water Partnership Program, which aims to enhance women leadership and regional dialogues in shared water courses in the Nile. So currently SIWI is actually developing a strategy to include other river basin organizations where we want to expand the network. And 2 of the river basin organizations which we want to extend this to is ZAMCOM and the Orange Senku River Basin. So we are currently engaging the 2 river basin organizations to expand the Women in Water Diplomacy Network so that we can enhance the leadership of women's decision-making in water resources management.
Thank you, Jan. I just wanted to let you know that your time is running out. If you want to, if you're able to wrap it up quite soon, okay. We've got a question for you as well.
All right. Yeah, and then another advocacy that we incorporate into Tiara is basically the virtual jobs concept, where the virtual jobs actually describes the equivalent income and livelihoods that would be earned and supported if the food imported in sub-Saharan Africa were actually to be cultivated and processed into and marketed in sub-Saharan Africa. And also to highlight that by importing food, we're actually contributing to the distortion of local markets, undermining of local agriculture and employment, the loss of jobs and livelihoods for the women that are engaged in it. And my call to action on how to reverse the trends, it's through the improved soil moisture that both my colleagues Lotta and Anna spoke about, but also the investments and the research, farmer education and support, value chain access, credit, and land tenure security, improving the gender equity in access to land, and supportive marketing and import policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janani. And I'll head straight then into the question that we've received that was for you. And of course, if anyone else has any questions to any of our panelists, please just write into the chat function. Similarly, and Lotte, if you'd like to contribute to the answer to this question, please feel free to. So the question to you, Janani, was that it's really great to see that gender is having a prominent place in the project. And is there any practical examples of how the project is reaching the farmers to make sure there is that change on the farm level?
Yes, so I would just also like to highlight that SC, we will work at the policy level. So we work through the national governments and the Zambezi River Basin organizations for them to reflect the gender equality and mainstreaming at their water sector and water reform policies. However, we do also have access to the farmers by being able to identify the hotspots where rain-fed agriculture stands to benefit from being scaled up. So we have currently actually identified about 5 hotspots between Zambia, Malawi, Harare, and Tanzania, where we will make small investments to establish the baseline of what the women farmers were actually making before the investments, and then put in some investments of enhanced rain-fed agriculture practices, and then monitor them maybe after 2 or 3 harvests to see what are the differences that come out. So we do work with the local NGOs who would then be able to make those small investments into the women-led rain-fed agriculture farming. But then we are limited because our organization is at the policy level, and we hope to influence that level to actually try to make the differences. So I hope that answer is sufficient.
Thank you so much, Janani. I see, Anna, you have your hand up as well, so I'll pass straight over to you.
Yes, I mentioned a project that we have in Ethiopia that Janani is also involved in, and there also we work at the local level together with local NGOs and local partners, and we have formed a partnership at district level with the Agriculture Extension Service. So that's also a way of reaching out to local people and targeting women with special trainings and outreach material. Just wanted to mention that. So we work in partnerships at multiple levels in the landscape.
And Lotte, go ahead.
I think Lotte, you...
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, now on. I mean, there's so many ways of kind of promoting gender equality, different ways. For our capacity building program, I mean, step number 1 is, of course, to ensure that there are women participants in the program. That's kind of number 1. But then it's really important to include the gender aspects in the discussions, and we do that in several ways. One way is that to some extent this program is working on kind of inspiring for change, building on Sweden's experience in our forest restoration history. And one way that we do quite well in Sweden is that we have quite a number of female forest owners. So when we kind of share examples, we also share examples, with Swedish female forest owners talking about their situation and just the possibility of being a female forest owner. Because when it comes to kind of getting a livelihood from the restored forests, there's several ways. One way is to kind of include traditionally female ways of income, which is often handicrafts and picking berries and honey and so forth. But at the same time, those incomes are not the major ones from the forest. The major income from the forest is actually the wood resource. So we're really encouraging also in these restoration activities to promote females' ownership of the forest and the entrepreneurship. So just a couple of ideas.
Thank you so much, Lotte. And before we move on to the next questions, thank you, Janani, for your presentation. It was really good also to get that extra, take it a step deeper when it comes to the consideration of people, and when we're talking about landscapes. We're obviously talking here, say, about the farmers, but the impact again of, for example, loss of food security impacts people quite heavily as well. So thank you to all three of you for lifting that so well and succinctly. So we have a couple of questions now. The first one is actually about a different region, but I'd be interested to hear it feels like if anyone has a response or a reflection. It's from Ajit, and they're asking how to manage water resilient landscapes in a country like India, which is heavy populated, and as we saw in your map, Lotta, most of the forests a lot of the forests look to be partially or fully degraded. Not to mention then the population putting pressure on the natural resources. So how have you got any experience or reflections on what water resilient landscapes would look like in an Indian context? That questions to anyone. Yes, go ahead, Anna.
Well, I think, can you hear me? Yeah, I think the approach is pretty similar to what we have presented. You have to form multi-stakeholder coalitions and agree on a common goal and look at trade-offs, for reforesting certain areas to improve hydrology downstream. But there are trade-offs, of course, with planting trees, and perhaps food production. So it's always, about this negotiation and involving different stakeholders. And I have seen examples of projects in India, watershed rehabilitation projects that use many of the principles in the landscape approach, and that have been quite successful. In addition, it's possible to implement PES mechanisms, perhaps in certain catchments, payment for ecosystem services, so that downstream users can pay for water-related ecosystem services generated by upstream communities that perhaps conserve their land, plant trees instead of planting crops, for instance. So I think this was in what is called now this it's central India somewhere, but I think there are many examples around India.
Thank you so much for sharing, Anna. And Lotta, did you want to add something there as well? Yes,
well, just saying that, of course, it's easier to restore a forest landscape in not so populated areas, especially if you talk about the kind of wide-scale covered forest landscape. But I mean, just planting trees in the landscape, even if it's not really a dense forest, really makes a difference when it comes to water management. So don't think about forest landscape restoration as only restoring covered forest, but also trees in the landscape, and try to combine it with agroforestry, which actually also includes food production. So that could be one way of looking at it.
Thank you, Lotta. Yeah, no, that's a good point as well, that when we say forests, we're not just talking about one kind of forest, but rather many different that have their own regional or contextual benefits and contexts. So I'll just ask the next question as well. Again, I'll just ask it generally, and please feel free to jump in if you have something to reflection or experience or an answer. So this has come from Benjamin, who I see is attending from Uppsala University, so welcome. Here the question is, I'll just read up the question. So our perceptual model of the hydrological cycle is really simplified, focusing mostly on water quantities, and does not describe the complex flow path of water through the landscape. How does this simplified model affect stakeholder discussions and water management decisions? Does this bias, I guess, towards this simplified version lead to wrong decisions when restoring and using landscapes from a local or a global scale?
Should I start maybe as I showed this very simplified model?
Yes.
We work also with we also work with more detailed models, at the local level. I think Lotta touched upon that a little bit. That shows the more detailed partition of water, the role of trees for infiltration, and also the density of trees in the landscape are important in certain semi-arid areas. For instance, you should not plant trees too many trees, in the same place. So yeah, we showed a simplified model here to give you our general approach, but we also have more sophisticated models that we work with together with our partners at universities in Sweden and abroad.
Maybe I can add on that, saying that, for example, in the ITP project, we really encourage, I don't know if you had time to see in the change project model, but there's kind of a different steps. And the initial research step is, of course, really important, looking at the local context. What is the hydrology there? What are the soil context? What is the topography like? What is the climate like? How much precipitation do you have? All those local aspects and facts that make up the local landscape. And one way of doing so is probably not to include city, because we don't see the details on the local level, but to include other research institutes in the area, which probably have the details more at hand. So one way of actually getting down to the details in the local context is to engage local actors with the specific knowledge that is needed in the specific area.
Yes, can I add something there? There is time. In Ethiopia, we are collaborating with the International Water Management Institute, looking at more sophisticated models for the water cycle, but also actually to work with local people and train what is called para-hydrologists. A champion in the community that will help to monitor water in different contexts.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you both for those reflections. And I think if anybody would like greater information about any of either the projects that my colleagues here have mentioned, or some of the answers to questions, very good questions, so thank you for those. Please feel free to reach out to my colleagues. I think that you all included your contact details in your presentations as well, so we'd be happy to, if we can, share any more information about said projects. I think there was a question on the way in here. I'll just see if it has come yet. No, it hasn't. Okay, well then let's wrap it up there. And Mahmoud, if you'd like to email us your question, and we'll see if we can answer it after this session. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers for sharing those extremely important and very interesting perspectives that must be sort of taken into account, as well as the examples when developing policy for the future and prosperity of both people and planet. And as we heard both in the presentations and via the questions, there isn't one way a forest can or should look, and that makes the local participation, understanding of geographical aspects of these landscape restoration projects even more crucial. And we have to make sure that any of these activities or actions that are being taken to restore landscapes is not being done at the expense of water. So thank you for raising those really interesting and important points. And hopefully those will be taken into consideration at Stockholm Plus 50. So the third and final webinar in this series is on Wednesday, so in 2 days. And it will be focusing on the role of water, sanitation and hygiene in safeguarding global health. So the webinar will examine the linkages between water, global health and human rights. We will post the registration link to the webinar in the chat now, so hopefully we'll see you there. But for now, I say thank you again. Thank you to our panelists and our audience. And maybe we'll see you again soon. Take care.